Good morning. Today we're going to be talking about equal protection of the law. If you remember our last class, we were talking about procedural due process or due process in general. But before we start class today, I wanted to read an excerpt, a couple of excerpts actually. There'll be two videos this morning from The Spirit of America. And why I think these are relevant to our discussion about equal protection was originally, many people don't know this, but in the Declaration of Independence, in one of the drafts in which Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1776, that he included a section related to the slave population and the slave trade. And so these are the words, first of all, of William Bennett related to this passage and this draft of the Declaration of Independence. And then we're going to read another excerpt later on from a famous founding father named Patrick Henry. But here are the words of William Bennett describing the passage we're about to read. In 1775, the population in America was 2.5 million. About 1/5 of all Americans were black, and nearly all of them were slaves living in the South. In Virginia, slaves were half the population, while in South Carolina, slaves outnumbered white inhabitants, constituting 2/3 of the population. At the time that Jefferson declared that all men were free and equal, about 500,000 were not. Jefferson attempted to protest the wrongs of slavery in our founding document, the Declaration of Independence. John Adams believed that the passages condemning slavery were the best parts of the Declaration of Independence. Yet, the Southern states strongly opposed Jefferson's position and would not vote for independence so long as it was included. It was stricken from the final draft. It's important to note that many of the founding fathers had the same sentiment of John Adams and of Thomas Jefferson. Many of the founders had slaves themselves, but realized that it was a travesty, realized that they were in the wrong, that it was not good practice. And so from the very beginning of the foundings of our country, the founding fathers tried to implement or put in place laws that prohibited the expansion of slavery. Anyways, this is the draft, one of the initial drafts of our Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson. Quote, "He, King George III, has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in one hemisphere and incur a miserable death in their transportation hither. This piratical warfare, the opprobrium of infidel powers, is the warfare of the Christian King of Great Britain. Determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold, he has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or restrain this execrable commerce. And that this assemblage of horrors might want no fact of distinguished dye, he is now exciting those very people to rise in arms among us, and to purchase that liberty of which he has deprived them by murdering the people on whom he has also obtruded them, thus paying off former crimes committed against the liberties of one people with crimes which he urges them to commit against the lives of another." In other words, Thomas Jefferson is claiming that the King of England not only practiced this idea of slavery by capturing people in one hemisphere, bringing them to the northern hemisphere, and then having them work, but then during the Revolutionary War, he was inciting the very slaves to rise up in arms against the rebels or against the Americans in order for them to gain their freedom. It was a pretty disturbing act of King George III in that time period.